Committee and encourage the Senate Education Committee members to get here so that we can pass the rules for the committee. But in the meantime, let's begin this informational hearing on local control funding formula. And I'd like to welcome our new committee, the two that are here, the new committee members, both Dr. Pan and Senator Leyva. And also from the Assembly, because we did invite the Assembly Education Committee and the Senate Budget Subcommittee to join us today, and we anticipate that eventually everybody will show up. So, oh, good for you. Great. Okay, let's call the, we're going to have a quorum, so let's call the roll. Oh, establish a quorum. Yeah, we do. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Blue?
Here.
Blue here. Huff? Block? Here. Block here. Hancock? Leyva? Here. Leyva here. Mendoza? Pan? Here. Pan here. Vidak?
Okay. It's 4. Okay, we don't have. You're in the budget sub. Yeah. Oh, you're confusing me. I was so excited. All right. So we're still here. So we're still here as a subcommittee. Okay, so we're excited today because we're looking forward to a very busy legislative session working with all of you to address a number of important educational policy issues over the next 2 years. But I thought it would be an important opportunity to have a chance to discuss one of the biggest changes in education in recent California history, the adoption and implementation of a completely new funding system, the local control funding formula. And it's my hope that today's hearing will provide members with information about the new LCFF funding formula, its current status, the challenges thus far, and the opportunities and options that lie ahead for both locals and state policymakers. Today, we will hear from a variety of perspectives from practitioners in the field, researchers and advocates on the development of LCAPs and the challenges and opportunities they see around LCFF implementation. We will also hear directly from the State Board on their thoughts on the state's evolving accountability system and their vision as to what comes next. We do have one item of business, but that won't happen until we establish a quorum. So we have a very full agenda, and we'll try to keep this on track considering the time. I do welcome my counterpart from the Assembly Chair of the Education Committee, Mr. O'Donnell. Welcome. And give you an opportunity to make some opening remarks if you'd like.
Well, thank you, and I'll be brief. I just want to thank you for holding this meeting, number one, and number two, for inviting me and the Assembly side. A little bit about me: I've been a teacher in the classroom for over 20 years, and I've lived LCFF. I come from a district where LCFF heavily impacts in a positive manner. So I look forward to this conversation and learning some more today, and again, I thank you.
Thank you. Okay, any other comments from any other members? Seeing none. All right, let's begin with an overview of LCFF, and we'll start with the Legislative Analyst Office and Edgar Cabral. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members. I'm Edgar Cabral with the Legislative Analyst Office. So my goal here is just to provide you a very brief summary or overview of the new changes that were adopted in legislation in 2013. And really it's 3 components. There's the new funding formula, the local control funding formula. There's also new requirements for districts to develop plans called local control and accountability plans, or LCAPs. Which help districts build plans and demonstrate how they're going to improve outcomes over the next 3 years. And then finally, a new system of support to help struggling school districts that have been identified as in need of improvement in certain areas. I believe in your packets you had a handout from our office. It looks like this is the title is Implementation of LCFF and LCAPs, and I won't go through it bullet by bullet, but there are a couple figures I did want to point to as I do give this presentation. So just to start very briefly with the LCFF, the idea with LCFF was to take what we had was general purpose funding and about 40 categorical programs that had various restrictions, collapse that into one funding formula that provided funding for districts based on student characteristics. And on page 1 of our handout, there's a chart there that shows you the per student funding under LCFF. The major pieces were, one is a base grant that was that depended on the student's grade. So high school students you got a little bit higher per.
Hang on,
Yeah.
Edgar. It's very exciting. We have a quorum.
Okay.
So please, let's go and call the roll.
Huff, Hancock, Mendoza. Mendoza here. Vidak.
Okay, we have a quorum. Thank you. Before you proceed, members on the Senate Education Committee, we do have committee rules that were passed out to you. We would like the adoption of the rules. Just for your information, the only change in the rules is item 4B, and it's because policy committees are now responsible for analysis of bills that reach third reading, and floor analysis reflect verified support and opposition. So it's the responsibility of the author's office to provide updated letters to this committee prior to bills reaching third reading, consistent with committee rules. Floor analysis will indicate that support and opposition cannot be verified, and therefore it will not be listed. So just be mindful that's the only change in the Senate committee rules, simply because the floor analysis is no longer being done by the pro tem's office. It's being done by this committee. Okay, so I'd like an adoption to the rules. Okay, rules have been moved and seconded. Please call the roll.
Lou.
Aye.
Lou, aye. Huff. Block. Block, aye. Hancock. Leyva. Leyva, aye. Mendoza. Mendoza, aye. Pan. Pan, aye. Vidak.
Okay, the rules have been adopted. Thank you. Thank you, members. I'm sorry, Mr. Cabral, please continue.
So again, on page 1 of the handout, we have a chart that shows you the per student rates under LCFF. There are 3 components. One is a grade adjusted base rate, which is based on the specific grade. So there's a different rate for K through 3, 4 through 6, 7 through 8, 9 through 12. Then there's supplemental funding, which is provided for every student in a district that is an English learner, a low-income student, or a foster youth. And then finally, concentration funding that is provided to school districts who have where more than 55% of their students are EL, low-income, or foster youth. The change, and one of the big things that this did was then treat students similarly across districts, so that a school district with certain demographics in various parts of the state were receiving the same amounts of funding, and that wasn't always the case under the old system. This new formula was adopted as part of the 13-14 budget plan, and over the past 2 years, 13-14 and 14-15, the primary ongoing increases in K-12 funding have gone to LCFF. There was a $2.1 billion increase in 13-14, a $4.7 billion increase in 14-15, and now in the governor's proposed 15-16 budget, again, the primary increase is in LCFF, and the governor is proposing to increase funding by $4 billion this year. So that's the basic structure of the formula. Then moving to the second component, which are local control and accountability plans, and these were also adopted in the same legislation. The state has now increased spending flexibility for school districts. School districts can now spend money in more ways than they had before. They have fewer restrictions. The new change, though, says districts, you can spend the money how you want. However, we do want you to create these plans called local control and accountability plans, or LCAPs, which gives a sense for the district, tells the community and the state, the public, information about how the district plans to improve over time. These LCAPs are to be 3-year plans, and they do require that districts are required to seek input from students, teachers, parents, and other community members. The LCAPs themselves, they're based in these 8 state priority areas that the state adopted in the legislation. And then districts, using those priorities as the framework, must set goals, and then from those goals specify the actions they're going to take to meet those goals, and then the way that they're going to measure that they've made progress towards those goals, or what metrics they're using. In our handout on page 4, you see a chart that walks through all of the 8 priority areas, and then statute lays out metrics that districts are to use for all those priority areas. So the information in these plans are intended to really show how districts are progressing towards meeting goals and what specific actions they're planning to take. On page 5, we have a very, very brief kind of example of a simplified example of how a district might, what a district might do in their LCAP. And the LCAPs, they were law required the districts to adopt their first local control and accountability plans by July 1st, 2014. The state board adopted approved templates earlier in the year. They were required to approve a template, and then districts were to use that template in building their plans. So we have, right now, we've seen 1 year of adoption. So districts are, had their first chance at doing that. In looking at what, if you were to open a district's plan and review it, you would see something more complicated than this, but we wanted to kind of give you a sense of what you might expect. So in this example, we have a district setting a goal to ensure all students are prepared for college and career upon graduation. And they might specify that this goal really is related to the priority areas of student achievement and to providing increasing course access for students. They may specify that they're going to offer additional science courses in order to meet this goal. And then the way they would measure progress on this goal, to measure that they have prepared students, is by measuring proficiency on state science standardized test. And also they may want to measure the number of new science teachers that they've hired. And so in this example here, you can see for those metrics, they set targets for 3 years. And so the district is planning to improve proficiency in science, and then also to hire 5 additional teachers over the year. This is kind of a small sliver of what you might see in a plan for a goal like preparing all students for college and career ready. You will see numerous actions with numerous ways to monitor progress over time. But the idea is that this provides, districts can then lay out their plans for improving outcomes. The public can see that information, and the state has information on what districts are planning to do. And this is obviously applies to not just LCFF, with other funds as well, but I think that within the context of the state providing much more flexibility to districts wanting more information about what districts' plans are. So that's the plan side. Then the next piece, which is still in progress and being developed, is developing a new system of support for school districts based on what are called evaluation rubrics. The state board, the law requires the state board to adopt evaluation rubrics by October of 2015, and these evaluation rubrics are intended to help county offices and the superintendent, and then also a newly created agency called the California Collaborative for Educational Excellence, to use these rubrics as a way to assess whether districts are performing well in the 8 state priority areas. Then if they aren't performing well in those areas, then county offices would then sort of facilitate some kind of support to districts to help them improve in those areas. So the rubrics, we don't know what, they haven't been developed yet. They're still in progress, so we don't know exactly what they look like. But the idea is that they do help districts get a sense of how they're doing, and ideally would also set some state level expectations for improvement in the priority areas. So I know that's a lot to kind of go through at one point, but I do think that it's important to connect how they all kind of work together. Ideally, as this system is in place, you have districts developing these plans. They then implement those plans. Then later on, county offices or others may review districts and tell them how they're doing in these various priority areas. And as they get more information on how they've been doing, they might then want to modify their plans or take different actions to improve outcomes in these areas. So it can become a sort of a system of continuous planning and improvement over time. So that was everything I had for now, but I'm happy to answer any questions someone might have.
Okay, fine, thank you. Questions about the process here, Dr. Pan?
Well, thank you so much for your presentation. I know this is a major effort here in our state to really try to improve the education for our children and help support people. In terms of the metrics, now I have a background in program evaluation, so I know developing metrics is often not a simple task. What sort of support and assistance is being provided to school districts and county offices of education in terms of developing metrics that are tied to their actions? Sometimes people come with something that looks good, but if it's not directly tied to what they're doing, that can be challenging to make a change in the metric. I mean, what sort of technical assistance and resources are being provided to school districts to make this happen? I know they only had 6 months to do their LCAPs, so I realize that it's going to be a work in progress, but how are we helping them out there?
Well, so for a lot of the metrics, and the statute lays out much of the metrics that are to be used, and most of those metrics, we would say, they are data that's already collected by the state. There's this kind of standard definition for what that metric should be, such as performance in standardized tests, the percentage of students who have met the UC and CSU requirements upon graduation. That information is fairly standardized, and so districts knew kind of that's the information that they could use. There are some areas, some of the priority areas, and I know I didn't spend much time on going through individually, but some of them don't have as kind of specific state-defined metrics. Like, for example, one of the priority areas is parental involvement. And the idea is that districts are to describe how they are going to increase parental involvement and engagement. There isn't a lot of, there isn't a clear metric in that case. And so we know that many county offices have tried to support districts in providing advice for what they could include. But it is an area where I think it's the first year, and there's a variety of different strategies. And in a lot of cases, I think districts are working on trying to develop better indicators that they can use in the future.
But also, I think as you're looking at as the different metrics are being developed, I know that somewhat, in some senses, the actions, if you're going to move the metric, right, then the actions have to be tied to the metric. So if we're establishing the metrics already at the state, then we need to help school districts choose the actions. The example that's actually in here from a evaluator standpoint actually weren't very well linked. You had a metric and an action that actually didn't directly connect with each other. And I think that it's going to be important if we're going to help our schools succeed and do better on the metrics that we've already decided they should be measured on, then we're going to need to give them assistance in being sure that the actions that they're taking are actually directly linked to those metrics. Or if we think they can take some different actions, but then we need to look at metrics that actually directly measure the outcome of those particular actions. Otherwise, there's going to be a disconnect and people can get frustrated. The other thing I actually wanted to also just touch on is certainly the very important role that's being assigned to the LCEE, the California CCE, the California Collaborative for Educational Excellence, right? And because they're supposed to advise and help school districts and provide and so forth. Now, I understand from committee staff that basically about $10 million for over 3 years has been allocated to that. Has the LAO looked, I mean, how many school districts are there in the state of California? Is that really enough resources to provide the level of technical assistance that I'm guessing we're going to need to be able to provide? I mean, they're not, there may be school districts that don't need their help at all, but it doesn't seem, I'm a little concerned about whether we are matching the resources with the need in terms of assisting school districts who may be having a challenge. And I don't know whether they're also going to help them out, aside from meeting it, in terms of helping develop action plans and so forth.
Well, I would say so. A couple of things. One is I think there are still some kind of unfinished pieces here, and part of it is the role of the collaborative. I believe statute provided $10 million, and I think there was a recognition it was sort of a placeholder while we figure out what the role of the collaborative will be. The collaborative has a 5-person board that's appointed by members of the legislature, governor, superintendent. Those that have now been in place. There's a fiscal agent, but it hasn't gone kind of up and running. And so I think that is an open question about what do you want that agency to do? Do you want it to be sort of the play, a large agency that is kind of the responders that go into districts and try to help them and provide support? Do you want them to be sort of maybe some high-level experts that are more connectors, that they know either that county offices or districts can go to and say, I have a problem in this area, do you know where I can go get good help? And they can help facilitate that? Or do you want them to be kind of the subject matter experts? There are a lot of different ways that could be structured, and obviously that would change what's the appropriate level of funding. So I think those are still questions that have not been completely worked out, that are still open issues that we think the legislature will want to consider. In terms of support, right now the county offices they have to approve the district's LCAP. In statute, their role is somewhat more limited. It's more based on did you follow the rules of did you use the template? Did you kind of follow the letter of the law? We know that from talking to counties that many counties have tried to provide more support about kind of on the issues that you've mentioned. Are your actions well tied to the metrics that you're measuring? Is that really exactly what you want to do? What's kind of a better approach? But right now, the state has not provided any additional resources to county offices or any others to say this is for you to staff up in these particular areas.
Okay. Well, I guess I realize that probably the CCE, at least at this stage, once we're just starting, people don't think of as something that's an immediate thing. But I could see that we'll catch up to that very shortly. And if they're not up and running and making and being able to provide assistance or refer assistance, whatever their role is, that sort of assistance is available, that can be very problematic very quickly. So I hope that we'll be following that aspect closely. I realize that probably people are thinking, well, isn't that a few years down the line? But that will be here behind us before we know it. And it's not going to happen like this. Someone's going to have to build that up, that capacity up, whether it's within or external or whatever. So I hope that LAO and certainly our committee will be following that aspect closely, because I was reading your report. It sounds like we're counting on them to do a lot to be sure we help, because you can only close so many schools, right? You can't just say school's bad, close this one, school's that bad, it's not good enough, close that one. That can only go so far. Eventually you need schools. And we need to, I think an improvement approach is really is what we need to try to be sure we have the capacity to teach our students. Closing schools just takes capacity away. So that means that if we're counting on the CCE and other types of mechanisms to help do that improvement, we need to be sure that they have the resources to do that.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other questions for Mr. Cabral? Thank you. We'll move on to Mr. Brooks Allen, for the Deputy Policy Director and Assistant Legal Counsel for the State Board of Education. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members. My name is Brooks Allen, and I serve as the Deputy Policy Director and Assistant Legal Counsel for the State Board of Education. A report that the State Board of Education approved last week is under tab 2 of your materials and provides greater detail, but I'll be giving you a high-level overview of what's in that report and talk a little bit about what's happening during the first year of implementation before the State Board of Education and what we've done and what we see coming up ahead. I'm excited to be here and to have the opportunity to share the considerable progress that the State Board of Education, in collaboration with our colleagues at the California Department of Education, have made in implementing the local control funding formula legislation to date, and some of what lies ahead. I greatly appreciate the context that Mr. Cabral just provided. As we work on the necessary details of implementation every day, we remain ever conscious of the historic nature and purpose of the LCFF and how it empowers local educators and directs increased resources to the districts serving the students with the greatest needs. As Governor Brown stated at the time of enactment, quote, "We are bringing government closer to the people, to the classroom where real decisions are made, and directing money where the need and challenge is the greatest." It's a good day for California, it's a good day for school kids, and it's a good day for our future. To ensure the promise of the LCFF is realized, the State Board of Education was entrusted by the legislature and Governor Brown with 3 critical duties during the early stages of LCFF implementation. 1, as Mr. Cabral mentioned, developing and adopting the regulations to govern the expenditure of supplemental and concentration funds. Developing 2, the local control and accountability plan template. And 3, developing and adopting the LCFF evaluation rubrics. With the 2013 school year already underway, when LCFF was adopted, by the legislature and enacted in July of 2013. The State Board of Education responded to widespread stakeholder requests by adopting the emergency spending regulations and the LCAP template as swiftly as possible in January of 2014, which was actually 2 months in advance of the statutory deadline for adopting the LCAP template, because everyone was so eager to get on with the work ahead. The goal of this early adoption was to maximize the amount of time provided for LEAs for local community engagement and development of the LCAPs in the initial year of implementation. The State Board initiated the permanent rulemaking process at the same time and highlighted that ongoing stakeholder outreach and submission of written comments would be critical to the development and successful implementation of the regulations and the template. The State Board of Education and the department, along with assistance from WestEd, sought to model extensive public and stakeholder engagement and transparency through the LCFF implementation and regulation adoption process. Stakeholder input was gathered at regional sessions, regularly scheduled meetings with representatives of statewide organizations, and through public comments at State Board meetings, which helped inform the development of the LCFF regulations, the template, and other supporting resources. The State Board of Education learned a lot over the past year about the processes that districts and charter schools, county offices of education have used to engage local stakeholders in discussions about improving student outcomes and developing their LCAPs. Groups such as the California State PTA, Families in Schools, the Association of California School Administrators, California School Boards Association, student groups such as Californians for Justice and PICO California helped to bolster student engagement, stakeholder engagement around the LCFF and communicate the State Board's progress in approving the regulations. Over the course of the board's meetings over the past year, for those of you who had the opportunity to attend or watch, you saw that we had hundreds, literally hundreds of education stakeholders, even at individual meetings, come to testify, including some members of the legislature, and were able to share their experience about the LCAP process in their local districts, as well as their perspective about where we should go. And the State Board of Education received thousands of written comments for its consideration. The process was praised, I'm happy to say, as a model of local stakeholder engagement by groups and organizations actively involved, as this report and your materials more clearly describes. Based on the input at the State Board meetings, as well as feedback from administrators, teachers, parents, students, and stakeholder groups throughout the year, the Department of Education and the State Board revised the expenditure regulations and the LCAP template through the formal rulemaking process. Many of the public comments the department and board received about the template proposed modifications to make it easier to use and to read for the community, for other stakeholders, and reviewers alike. As a result, the board adopted changes to the template and regulations, including, notably, changes proposed and supported by members of the legislature, and approved the permanent LCFF expenditure regulations and the LCAP template at its November 2014 meeting. The changes have been praised by a wide range of stakeholders, including, as recently as yesterday, the Legislative Analyst's Office. And the State Board and department staff believes the revised template and regulations, combined with experiences from this past year, will result in LCAPs for the upcoming year, looking ahead 3 years as well as looking back 1 year, that are going to be able to better describe LEA goals, actions, and services to address the state priorities and meet the needs of all students, including, notably, all student subgroups. One addition in particular I want to highlight today, and that is that this is going to be the first year that local educational agencies will be taking a look back. Because, of course, last year, in the abbreviated year, they're just looking 3 years out. So this is the first year that the template is going to include separate goal tables for the annual update. Each year, the annual update will communicate to local stakeholders the progress towards implementation of those locally determined goals and how implementation compares to the adopted LCAP. This will include a comparison of planned versus implemented actions, services, and expenditures. So it'll be literally side by side. What did we plan to do, and what were we actually able to implement? The annual update will also provide evidence of progress towards the expected outcomes along some of the metrics that were just referred to earlier, and adjustments based on a reflection of state and local priorities. The State Board is interested to learn how the new template and regulations are implemented this year and will continue to review and make any necessary revisions as we move along. The evaluation rubrics, which is the third piece of our core charge, are on the immediate horizon, are envisioned as part of a larger system that supports the overall objectives of the LCFF to improve student outcomes, support transparency, and increase equity. The State Board must adopt these evaluation rubrics by October 1st of this year, as required by the Education Code. And they are intended to allow school districts, county offices, and charter schools to evaluate their strengths, weaknesses, and areas that require improvement. 2, to assist county superintendents to identify districts and charter schools in need of assistance and the specific priorities upon which that assistance should be focused. And 3, to assist the superintendent to direct interventions when warranted. Furthermore, the statutes require that the rubrics provide standards for school district and individual school site performance and expectations for improvement related to the LCFF state priorities in the Education Code. The board has contracted with WestEd to lead an inclusive public rubrics development process modeled on the successful engagement process we use for the development of the regulations and the template. WestEd staff are working with the rubric design group, comprised of educational leaders from school districts, county office of education, charter schools, Department of Education staff with responsibility for reviewing county office of education's LCAPs, State Board of Education representatives, and others. And currently, we are in the process of convening the second round of what are going to be multiple rounds of regional input sessions to gather ideas and feedback from parents, teachers, students, practitioners, researchers, community leaders, and legislators from across the state. For those of you who are interested, for those of you who are watching, and those, of course, that I'm addressing today, information about the rubrics development process is posted and will be regularly updated at lcff.wested.org. Or simply, if you plug in LCFF and WestEd, that's going to pop up the LCFF channel for you. This includes notifications regarding input opportunities, a forum for online feedback, and summaries and updates about the proceedings in progress. So please visit that website for additional details because, as I say, just literally in the next 2 weeks, we've got multiple sessions scheduled. The draft rubrics based on stakeholder feedback will be presented to the board this spring. A very rough draft was literally just posted on the website this morning, and it will be the subject of these input sessions coming up, and the final draft will be considered by the board at its September meeting. In closing, I wish to emphasize that we are in the earliest stages of LCFF implementation, and considerable work remains ahead. Schools are in the midst of exciting and significant changes with higher standards in core subjects, increased funding, and a greater ability to determine how resources are invested to improve student outcomes. The current school year is the first in which students, parents, teachers, and administrators have been able to start with a full year ahead and an opportunity to plan a full year of engagement, planning activities around the LCAP, and a focus on the newly defined state priorities, as well as the local goals and actions underneath each of them. The state is working our way toward the LCFF funding targets, and key pieces of the LCFF puzzle are still being constructed, as just referenced recently. The key support systems, including the rubrics, as well as the California Collaborative for Educational Excellence, are just now on the verge of being launched. And yet, we remain ever cognizant of the fact that our children are attending school every day, including my own, and need all of us to continue to do everything we can, as quickly as we can, to ensure that the LCFF and other changes underway in our schools provide them with the educational opportunities they need and deserve. With that in mind, the board is committed to learning from the implementation challenges that are expected to come with any effort of this scale, and we are committed to continue to make the improvements all of us seek to realize the ultimate goals of the LCFF. Thank you, and I welcome your questions.
Sure. Any questions for Mr. Allen? Okay, well, easy right now.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Carolyn Chu from the LAO's office are going to give us some issues for consideration in this discussion.